Hello and welcome to Holy Dialogues. My name is Reverend Marian Edmonds Allen, and I'm happy to welcome my friends.
Reverend Kim Pearl, also known as Missouri Pastor. You can find me at missouripastor.org. And wake up, Jeremy.
I'm muted. I'm Jeremy.
I am so happy to welcome actually two of my children today to join us. And I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, and I'm going to ask them to answer the question, what is transgender?
Oh, hi. It's nice to meet you all. My name's Giacomo. Everyone calls me Jack, and I use he, him pronouns.
My name is Geri. I use they, them pronouns. Shocker of shocks. I am transgender. Transgender, I guess the literal definition is when you don't identify with the gender or sex that you were assigned to at birth. That's like I would say that's like the textbook kind of baseline definition, but everyone's experience of gender identity and everyone's experience as a transgender person is unique to them. So everyone kind of has a different way of approaching it.
Well, I am really interested to hear your story. Like, when was the first time that you sensed that you were not identifying with your birth gender? And then what is that journey like? That's way
My journey
over.
began. Oh no, sorry. My journey began at a very young age. I would even say like as early as kindergarten, as like gargantuan as that might seem. And for me, it was like such a growing process because I knew something was just like different about me. I had for the longest time no idea what that was. Because just where I was born and brought up in upstate New York, and with my Christian upbringing, we didn't really have like an education about what it meant to be LGBTQ. And just when I was born in the mid 1990s, there, the LGBTQ community and exposure wasn't quite there yet. So I had no idea about what transgender was or meant. I didn't even know what the term gay meant until I was in 5th grade, actually. So for me, coming out happens in maybe like around 15 years old. And even then, I had no concept of what the term non-binary meant, which is what I identified actually until just recently. So that's my story.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say I had a similar experience to Jack. The advent of the internet, smartphones and stuff. There's a lot more widespread information about different identities and what transgender is, genderqueer. But the first trans person I ever knew about was one I saw on TV. You know what I mean? And that was later. But like as a kid, you know, um, it was like, oh well, you're a tomboy. You're probably a lesbian. It wasn't like I didn't have the word transgender, but there was definitely this knowledge that the gender role that was expected of me was not, I wasn't meeting, the benchmark. Um, and it definitely is like a growing process and a growing journey.
Yeah, because I remember like transitioning in super small ways. Like there was like clothing that was more masculine that I wanted to wear, like even like Axe. Like when I was in middle school, I wanted to wear Axe, not perfume. And my dad was like, no, you don't want to wear Axe. That's what you're attracted to. That's what you want to smell on men. Like, so it's that kind of reaction you get, like that kind of like, but I had the same experience as Geri too. Like, not only did I not know what transgender meant, the first transgender person I ever saw was in the movie Silence of the Lambs, and it was Buffalo Bill, a transgender serial killer. So for the longest time, that's what I thought a transgender person was like. There's that stereotypical portrayal of a transgender person as somebody who's predatory or dangerous.
Mhm.
So for a long time, I didn't want to be identified with that.
When you started, thank you for sharing this, by the way. When you started to realize you might be transgender, how did how did you go about beginning to talk about it with loved ones, family, and friends? What was that like?
Um, for me, I was extremely fortunate. I just feel so blessed every single day that I grew up with somebody like my mother, Marian. My mom was the first person I ever came out to, and her reaction was just amazing. Her reaction of acceptance. Um, for me, it was more complicated, like navigating it around my personal relationships. Um, it's like the common saying about being transgender is every single day you have to come out. Um, Especially for somebody like me, I identify as transmasculine, but a lot of people clock me. So I have to correct them a lot of the times. And in past relationships, it's really been something very difficult to navigate because a lot of people on the surface will say that they're accepting of somebody who's gender nonconforming or transgender. But when it actually comes to you presenting yourself in a certain way, it can make them uncomfortable. Um, so for me, the most difficult part of it has actually been romantic relationships.
And Geri, before you go, I want to ask you another question, Giac. One thing we've talked about in these sessions is like not presuming we know anything about what words mean because they can be complicated. Now, when you said you were clocked, I think I know what you mean, but I'm not sure. So what did you mean by that?
Well, so there's the term passing, which I don't really like to use, but basically passing in the transgender community is basically when society does see and recognize you as a gender you would like them to. So for example, as a trans masculine person, I am passing if on the streets everybody thinks that I am a man. But when you're clocked, people think, oh, that's a woman, just in some like boyish clothes, but no, that's a woman. So you're being clocked. I hope, does that make sense? I hope.
It does, and curious, Geri, for you as well. What was it like starting to disclose what was happening as you were discovering yourself? What was it like to disclose to friends and family?
Yeah, similarly, I have a really cool mom. Thank goodness. Yeah, I I was lucky in that when I was hitting like middle school, high school, the internet exploded with a lot of information about queer identities, queer rights, things like that. So I had a very, very strong, I was like, I'm not a boy, not a girl. I use they, them. That's the way it is. You know what I mean? I was very, very steadfast in that. And I remember coming out to mom. It's one of my favorite stories to tell. I came home from school and I was like, these people at school, they don't respect people's names, they don't respect pronouns. And mom was like, yeah, that's so messed up. Do you have a pronoun I should know about? That was how I came out. I totally buried the lead. Um, but yeah, coming out to friends and family, especially if you use like they, them, or you're not in their binary idea of what gender is, man and woman, and you're like, no, I'm something else. It can be difficult. There's a lot of explanations that kind of need to happen, a lot of like baseline information that has to be laid down. Um, but I've been very lucky in my experience with my family and with my friends.
And
Not
And I just want to make a super quick side note. Oh, sorry to interrupt. That it's really important for me to recognize how lucky that I am coming out as a transgender person. I'm not gonna lie, we have family members who don't talk to us now and who don't even feel comfortable letting us around their children. But for a lot of transgender people, it is incredibly unsafe to come out, especially at a young age when you're so vulnerable to violence or being even thrown out of your house. So I just want to say that to all the transgender people who might be watching, if you're still in the closet and you feel uncomfortable telling people, that's fine too. And sometimes you do need to wait. Sometimes that's the safest thing to do, and you shouldn't feel pressured to come out.
Pastor Kim, I don't want to jump in. I have one more question, and I feel like I've asked
You're
too many.
doing good.
Okay. Well, so I want to put on I've just met Geri and Giac for the first time. And so I'm gay, came out I guess later in life, was in the military. And is it fair to say, I mean, I speak for myself when I say this, but I'm curious about your experience that, as a group, especially through the lens of politics, national society groups us all together, gay men, lesbians, transgender folks, amongst others. But in your experience, is it fair to say that can be a little dangerous because we're all independently different, although we're grouped together? For example, I didn't meet anyone. I mean, I was living as a gay person here in DC. I didn't meet anyone transgendered that I became friends with that I knew on a personal level until I was probably in my early 30s. So just because society may group us all together, it doesn't mean like we're just this big lump. That's at least how I feel. But I'm curious about what your experience has been, since we're all grouped together, but yet that's not always doesn't always make sense to me because our experiences are so different. Any thoughts?
Oh, I agree completely. Yeah, everybody likes to throw around the world LGBTQ community. Sometimes really fast like that, LGBTQ. But we are so divided in so many ways still. Like, for example, the history of the world of the word LGBTQ. It actually used to be referred to as GLBTQ. They only switched it to LGBTQ to actually recognize the fact that there was the presence of women, of lesbians in the LGBTQ movement. Like, that was a significant verbal change that happened. And you see it also with the bisexual community, with the prejudice that people still face with that. And the transgender community, the tagging on the T, there is actually significant pushback to even include transgender people in the community. And a lot of that came from actually the mental health community aspect, actually, because gender dysphoria and being transgender was considered for such a long time a mental illness, and the LGBT community didn't actually want transgender people to be affiliated with the community. So those are like very old historical examples that just come to mind for me. I'm sure you have a lot to say, Geri.
I always have a lot to say. It's getting me to shut up. That's the hard part. Uh, it's thinking about the concept of inter-community and intra-community conversation, right? There are communities that we have, let me back up. There are conversations we have in the LGBTQ community that wouldn't be something I bring up with a straight person, right? So there's different spheres that we're moving in that I think are important to recognize. And that's why I feel, I feel such pride in the term the queer community, the LGBTQ community. Because it's like, I'm in a community of people, this is where I'm safe. And yet, there is some difficulty within the community in intra-community conflict. For example, I'm trans, I use they, them, and binary trans people are like, no, 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 you're giving us a bad name. You know what I mean? There's intra-community conflicts and conversations that make it difficult to love the lump, you know? But I still feel a lot of pride and a lot of belonging when I see queer community or the LGBTQ community. So I think it just depends.
Ooh, I love that phrase, love the lump. That's so
That's
descriptive.
good.
So what would you say to someone who maybe feels insecure about loving the lump? We'll call us the lump at this point. What would you say to them about like to invite them into a space to love the lump?
To me, all across human history, what's made us such a unbelievable species is the fact that we're so diverse and complicated and ever changing. And I think one of the most beautiful things about the LGBTQ community is the fact that we're always like evolving and changing with the times. Like it just used to be the gay community, became the LGB community, now it's the LGBTQ community. Like our vocabulary and understanding of ourselves is always developing. And for me, that's just so inspiring. Like I'm just excited to see 15 years from now if I'm going to be some old fart who's so behind on the times, you know? Like I'm genuinely excited to learn more. Like Geri is 5 years younger than me. And I feel like every day I'm learning like some new aspect of like the Jay-Z community. Like I do. I just think it's just such a crazy and fun community to be a part of. So I really hope people recognize the fact that diversity doesn't have to be scary. It can be really exciting and life-changing.
You know, at the time of this recording, it's June the 1st, which is the first day of Pride Month. Yeah, I just saw that this morning on my calendar. Yeah. But I was thinking of a couple things. So you are pastor's kids. Yeah. And so I was just wondering, do you share the same views of the church or in God as your mom? Just wondering. Because I deal with that with my kids. I'm a straight lady over here, and often ask them, where are you at with what your view is of the church and God, being a pastor's kid?
All right, I'll go first. So I actually am an atheist. I grew up in the church. I grew up, my mom was my Sunday school teacher for a while. I think the changing point for me was I became involved with like a more conservative Lutheran church when I got a little bit older, and they exposed me to some views that I would consider personally hateful, to be honest, discriminatory towards my own community. So yeah, that doesn't like reflect on who I am as an atheist, because I believe that I'm spiritually, that's what I would have been drawn to anyways, but that did for a period of time affect how I saw the Christian church. But I became recently involved with a international universitarian church. And I don't know, hearing the experiences of so many LGBTQ people who have had like such a positive interaction with Christian faith has really been like inspiring to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Geri, you're welcome to share. You don't have to. I'm totally fine. Either way, I respect all of those feelings.
I'm telling you, it's not the problem getting me to talk, it's getting me to stop.
Oh.
Yeah, no, again, similar experience to Giac. I went to Sunday school as a kid, had fun. Mom is being so quiet. It's so funny watching her face. Anyway,
I'll ask her questions in a minute.
Yes. went to Sunday school as a kid, and then through news and word of mouth and what I was experiencing, I began to associate religion and Christianity with hateful rhetoric. In my mind, the two became inseparable. So I had a moment where I was like, nope, and then actually really recently, when I started going to college, I found this church where the pastor began by saying, brothers and sisters and siblings, we are gathered. And I was like, oh, you know?
Yeah.
And as my mom and I started to talk more about the idea of queer theology, I realized that I kind of missed God in a way. So now when I go to college, I have a church that I go to, and
Okay.
I'm back in the fold, I guess.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Geri. Appreciate that. Marian, you want to? I would like to hear about your journey as well as mom and as pastor too. Um, I don't know if you see any of that kind of folding around in here, but
Well, one
um,
story that I love to tell is when Giac and I, when Giac came out to me, it was when I realized very late in life that I was a queer person. So I decided, okay, I'm going to tell Giac, and engineered a big long car ride because that's where you have serious conversations with your kids. So we're driving along, and I said, Giac, I need to tell you something. And this was, Giac was very young then. And anyway, I need to tell you something, Giac. And Giac said, oh, I need to tell you something. So we went back and forth. No, you go first. I'll go first, all that. So Giac went first and said, Mom, I need to tell you I'm gay. And I said, oh, that's my news. You stole my news, because so we had decided separately, independently, to come out to each other in the same car trip. I had no clue at all that Giac was going to come out to me. No clue, zero. So that's kind of my funny story that I like to tell about.
wow, what a story.
Yeah. So when I talk to parents and they feel embarrassed that they didn't see any of the signs that their kid was gay or transgender or something, I always tell that story because, I'm someone who works in LGBT concerns, and that doesn't mean as a mom, I sure as heck get things wrong every single day, and I don't notice things about my own kids. We're just human, and we're just doing the best we can. So as a mom, it's been a blessing to me to be on the journey with Giac and Geri, because I've learned so much more about transgender folks from from being a parent than I ever have from my professional life or my academic life. So I always say to folks, if you can make a friend with someone who's transgender, that'll be a blessing to your life. So that's one thing. As a pastor, it's also added to my own personal theology. I see God as so much more beautifully complex and diverse than I ever did. And I always did before. I'm that person who will see, a little ant, and that the ant makes me think of the beauty of God's creation. I think, wow, what a God who would create this ant, this tree. I always think that way. But knowing my transgender kids, I realized that God is so much more than I could ever dream of. So to me, having transgender kids really enriches my personal faith, and that's a blessing to me too.
Mhm. Oh,
Wow, that is beautiful. Now I can't think of any more questions because of that.
So I think here's your chance to ask the question. We hear people kind of wonder questions to us about transgender folks, and they don't know who to ask. Here you have two transgender folks that you can ask questions of. What do you like, Pastor Kim? What do you hear in your community? Jeremy, how about you? What do you hear in your community? What would you like to ask them?
mhm.
I do have a question while you're thinking, Pastor Kim. and it comes from being a gay man perspective, which is when I first met my first transgender friend. Here I am, like in a gay bar, like a part of what the world says is the gay community, and not knowing anyone transgender. And I met my first transgender friend, even as a gay man, insecurities arose about how I speak, what I say, what questions are on or off. It brought on this. Here I am, a gay man, a part of this community. It brought on all these like insecurities of like, what if I say the wrong thing and sound like an idiot, or if I sound offensive? How would you suggest to the whole world, not just the gay community or me or anybody who wants to reach out but feels like I don't know how to like not be offensive because I don't know anything about this? What would you say to them about building that bridge of community?
Just like when you're talking to anybody else, sensitivity and respect. Ironically, I was thinking of the same story mom just told about coming out for the first time. What she left out was her way of coming out was also taking me to a queer theater company and watching like some like queer theater production.
Well,
And
it was now hang on. It was a Sarah Orne Jewett play, and I had no idea it was an LGBT play. So that's to me, that's God's sense of humor. I had no idea. We got to the theater, there was this LGBT group that had set up a display, and I'm like, what is going on? So anyway, to me, that's God's sense of humor. I did not plan that, Jack.
That is
wow. Well, I
wow.
just learned something. Anyway, um, so anyway, sorry. So sensitivity and respect, because I remember as a very young person meeting LGBTQ people for the very first time and feeling just like you did, Jeremy, just feeling awkward and out of place. And that was as a transgender person. And I just think that's so normal. But as long as, like, even if you have questions, as long as you are just respectful about it. And I think also with the transgender community, it's all about your relationship with that person and knowing like the time and place for questions.
Okay.
Like our gender is such a private thing in a way, because let's just think about it realistically. We put a lot of time and money into looking a certain way just so society doesn't clock us. So the time is never in a public space to be asking like really like private questions, I would generally say, especially, you know, if it is about like them coming out or their transition. And I think another thing to just consider is like how intimate your relationship is with that person and whether or not you've ever discussed those questions before with them. As a transgender person, I don't ever like to be like just surprised. Yeah, sensitivity and respect, but also just a knowledge of where your relationship is at and like physically the space that you're in.
Do you find yourself in situations where you're asked what pronouns to use? Or are you used to people just like making assumptions or clocking you? Or I guess if that word's come up, then people just, I guess, is it straight people that find they would clock you most often and not know?
Um, so I live right now in Utah, and Utah is an amazing place. However, like in the it is easy for people to just assume your gender. Me personally, I have not been able to change my legal name yet. So in the workplace, it's very difficult for me because that's my name legally is a feminine associated name. So
Okay.
that is something that I constantly have to struggle with. So I think it is normal for cisgender heterosexual people to just assume your gender. It's becoming more and more common in social circles to ask for people's pronouns instead of just assuming. which I think is a really amazing thing as our knowledge of gender becomes more complex.
Okay. Geri, have you struggled with that, with the misuse of the pronoun and who those people usually are?
Yeah, they, them can be kind of a hurdle sometimes. Take some practice. And I think of my siblings in the trans community who use like here or they, femme or different pronouns that aren't he, she, or they. And it can be very difficult. Uh, something, when it comes to questions, when it comes to, oh my gosh, you're the first person I've met that ever uses this pronoun. Oh my gosh, I totally agree with Jack's, how you talk to anyone else. How close am I with this person? Did we just meet? Should I Google this first? Uh, something I think a lot of trans people struggle with is the idea that we have to be the ambassador, that the trans dictionary. That can be hard. So it's just, I feel like you kind of sense that love and that friendship when you're learning something new about someone.
Mhm.
I'll say it as a mom, just to jump in here. So when I'm out and about with my kids and my kids are misgendered or someone uses the wrong pronoun, it's it's very hard for me to know what to do because I feel like I want to jump in and correct the person and say, well, no, this is a gender, this is a pronoun, and yet I'm aware that these my kids are now adults and it's their job to do that. So as a as someone who works in the field, what I tell other parents is something that I do not do myself. So what I tell other parents is have the conversation with your child, and you could do this with your friend. Have a conversation with someone you love and ask them, if someone misgenders you or uses the wrong pronoun for you, do you want me to say anything or do you want me to keep quiet? And then that way, And so later on, I'm going to have this conversation with my kids because I'm aware when I'm with them and this happens, I feel stricken by it. And, I can't even imagine what that feels like for them. So this is definitely a conversation to have with your loved ones. So Geri and Jac, later we'll chat.
And can I just say one thing? For you, if you have transgender people in your life, have that conversation because personally, for me, it is such an enormous blessing if I have a friend or family member who is willing to jump in situations like that. Because when people misgender me, like sometimes I'm able to like explain my pronouns, and other times it's like just like this shock sensation, and I'm just like struck silent or I feel too awkward to say anything. It's uncomfortable. So having somebody with me who is able to just jump in and say, actually, he prefers he, him pronouns, that can be just incredible. So if you're willing to do that for your transgender friend or family member and you've talked with them like prior hand and they would like you to do that, please go ahead. I really, for me, like it's such a blessing.
I think about my community. I'm in a rural context in the middle of the US, very conservative. And I can imagine that there are trans people in my community, and it's hard for me to see them because I think that they would be afraid. And if they're watching this, I just want you to know that I care and would like to work through that struggle with you because I believe everybody needs a pastor to walk through that kind of thing with. Yeah. And I'm I really appreciate you both coming and allowing us to ask questions and being very gracious to us in this space today. Appreciate that.
Yes,
Well, thank you both so much for having us.
So it's so beautiful to see. Like we love Marian, we love Pastor Marian, and now seeing Geri and Giac, it's just like it's something special. So, it I'm honored to meet you all. You're really fun to talk to. Like this is you all's definite like lane. You're very conversational. You made this super fun and
Mhm.
lively. Hopefully, you'll come back again sometime.
Yeah, because we're going to need help.
Personally, I'd be happy to. I just think it's so beautiful what you guys are doing here, because there has been such this divide between the religious community and the LGBTQ community. So it's just so beautiful to see, you know, an understanding being created, a safe space for dialogue like this. Like I'm just so happy to be a part of it.
Thank you for your graciousness.
Thank you, children. And yes, so Jeremy and Kim, we have in-house experts to be guests. And so viewers out there, if you have questions that you would like to ask about transgender stuff, now you can send those our way and we can include those in our conversation as well. So thank you very much to our special guests, Geri and Giac, and Pastor Kim, the Missouri pastor. Always such a pleasure to be with you. And my friend Jeremy from DC, always such a pleasure to be with you. And until next time, this is Holy Dialogues. Bye-bye.